I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd fall in love while sharing a tent with someone, but life has a way of surprising you when you're least prepared for it. My name is Mason, and this is the story of how a week-long camping trip with my best friend completely changed everything I thought I knew about myself and what I wanted from life. It started 3 months ago when my roommate Tyler convinced me to sign up for this wilderness expedition program. Tyler was one of those naturally outdoorsy people, the kind who could start a fire with 2 sticks and actually enjoyed sleeping on the ground. I was more of a Netflix and takeout kind of guy, but I'd been feeling stuck lately, trapped in a routine that felt like it was slowly suffocating me. So when Tyler said we should do something completely different, something that would push us out of our comfort zones, I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The program was run by this environmental organization that took small groups into the back country for a week of hiking, camping, and what they called personal growth experiences. There were 12 of us total, and we'd be paired up as tent partners for the duration of the trip. I assumed Tyler and I would be paired together since we signed up as a unit, but the organizers had other ideas. They wanted to mix people up, force us to connect with strangers, build new relationships. That's how I ended up paired with Kai. I still remember the first time I saw him at the initial meet and greet 2 weeks before the trip. He was standing by the coffee table, laughing at something one of the organizers had said, and I felt something shift in my chest. He had this presence about him, this easy confidence that made everyone around him relax. His hair was dark and slightly messy, like he'd just run his fingers through it, and when he smiled, these little crinkles appeared at the corners of his eyes. I told myself I was just appreciating that someone else on this trip seemed friendly and approachable. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be lies. When they announced the tent pairings and called out my name followed by his, Kai looked across the room and caught my eye. He gave me this small wave and a grin that made my stomach do something weird. I waved back, trying to look casual, like my heart wasn't suddenly beating faster for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. The night before we left for the trip, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the week ahead, about being in close quarters with Kai, about whether I'd packed the right things or if I'd completely embarrassed myself on the trail. Tyler found me at 2 a.m. sitting on our couch, staring at my backpack like it held the answers to questions I was afraid to ask. "You're overthinking this," he said, dropping down next to me. "It's just camping. Fresh air, pretty views, s'mores. What's the worst that could happen?" I didn't know how to tell him that I wasn't worried about the camping part. I wasn't even sure what I was worried about, just that something felt different, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't see clearly yet. The first day of the trip was chaos. We met at dawn, loaded into vans, and drove 3 hours to the trailhead. Everyone was buzzing with nervous energy, checking and rechecking their packs, applying sunscreen, taking photos. Kai found me in the parking lot as I was struggling with my hip belt, and without asking, he stepped behind me and adjusted the straps until the weight of my pack sat properly on my hips. "There," he said, his hands lingering for just a second on my shoulders. "That should feel better." It did feel better, but I was suddenly very aware of how close he was standing, the warmth of his body behind mine, the smell of his deodorant mixed with something else, something that was just him. "Thanks," I managed to say, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "We're in this together, tent partner," he said with that smile again. "Gotta make sure you don't bail on me halfway through." The first few miles of hiking were brutal. My pack felt like it was filled with rocks, my boots were stiff and unforgiving, and I was sweating through my shirt before we'd even gone 2 miles. But Kai stayed close, matching his pace to mine even though I could tell he could have gone much faster. He pointed out things along the trail, a bird's nest tucked into a tree, wildflowers I didn't know the names of, the way the light filtered through the canopy above us. He talked enough to keep my mind off my aching legs, but not so much that I couldn't breathe, and I found myself relaxing into the rhythm of it, the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other with him beside me. We reached our first campsite in the late afternoon, and I was exhausted in a way I'd never experienced before. Every muscle in my body was screaming, and all I wanted was to collapse. But there was camp to set up, and Kai was already pulling out our tent, spreading it on the flattest piece of ground he could find. "Come on," he said, tossing me a handful of stakes. "I'll teach you how to do this properly so we don't wake up in a puddle if it rains." We worked together, and he was patient when I messed up, when I couldn't figure out which pole went where, when I accidentally staked one corner too tight. His hands brushed against mine more than once as we worked, and each time I felt that same flutter in my chest, that same awareness of him that I kept trying to push away. That night, after we'd eaten dinner around the campfire, and everyone had shared awkward introductions and fun facts about themselves, Kai and I crawled into our tent. It was smaller than I'd imagined, just barely enough room for our 2 sleeping bags side by side with a few inches of space between us. I could hear his breathing in the darkness, steady and calm, while mine felt too loud, too fast. "You okay over there?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said. "Just not used to sleeping outside." "It takes some getting used to," he agreed. "But listen. Really listen." I did. Beyond our tent, I could hear the wind moving through the trees, the distant sound of the stream we'd camped near, the occasional pop and crackle of the dying campfire. And closer, much closer, I could hear Kai's breathing, the rustle of his sleeping bag as he shifted to get comfortable. "It's kind of nice," I admitted. "Peaceful. Wait until you hear the sound of me snoring," he said with a laugh. "You might change your mind." But he didn't snore, and I lay awake for a long time that night, listening to him breathe, feeling something inside me shift and settle into a new configuration I didn't quite understand yet. The days blurred together after that, each one following a similar pattern. We'd wake up early, pack up camp, hike for hours through terrain that ranged from challenging to brutal, then set up camp again in a new location. My body adapted faster than I expected, the aches fading into a general soreness and then into something that felt almost like strength. But it was the nights I started living for, those hours after dinner when Kai and I would retreat to our tent and talk in the darkness. We talked about everything. Our childhoods, our families, our dreams and fears, and the things we'd never told anyone else. Kai told me about his parents' divorce when he was 12, how he'd felt caught between 2 homes and never quite belonging in either. I told him about my anxiety, how sometimes I felt like I was watching my life happen from the outside, unable to fully participate. He told me about the guy who'd broken his heart junior year of college, and I felt something twist in my chest at the casual way he said it, the easy acknowledgement of who he was. I'd never told anyone that I sometimes wondered about myself, about why I'd never felt the same way about the girls I'd dated that everyone else seemed to feel. Why relationships always felt like I was going through the motions of something I was supposed to want but didn't quite. But there in the darkness of that tent, with Kai's voice soft and honest beside me, I felt like I could say anything. On the 4th night, after a particularly difficult day of hiking that had left us both exhausted and a little punchy with tiredness, we were lying in our sleeping bags talking about nothing important when Kai suddenly went quiet. I could feel the shift in the air between us, the way the silence felt heavy with something unsaid. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Sure," I replied, my heart suddenly beating faster. "Why did you sign up for this trip? Like, really? You don't strike me as the outdoorsy type." I thought about lying, about giving him the easy answer, about wanting to try something new, but I found I didn't want to lie to him. "I don't know," I said slowly. "I think I was hoping that if I changed my circumstances, I might figure some things out about myself. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," he said softly. "It makes perfect sense. Have you figured things out?" "I'm starting to," I said, and even in the darkness I could feel him smile. The next day we reached the highest point of our trek, a ridge that looked out over miles of wilderness. The view was stunning, all rolling mountains and valleys filled with trees, but I found myself looking at Kai instead, watching the way the wind moved his hair, the expression of pure joy on his face as he took it all in. And I realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that I'd been lying to myself for weeks, maybe longer. I wasn't just appreciating his friendship. I wasn't just comfortable around him. I was falling for him, had maybe been falling for him since that first meeting, and the realization terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. That night, our second to last night on the trail, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag, hyper-aware of Kai beside me, of the sound of his breathing, of the small space between us that suddenly felt like both too much and not enough. I must have been moving around too much because eventually he stirred. "Can't sleep?" he whispered. "No," I admitted. "Too much in my head." "Want to talk about it?" I did and I didn't. I wanted to tell him everything and I wanted to keep it locked inside where it was safe. "I think I'm figuring out those things I came here to figure out," I said carefully. "And it's kind of overwhelming. The good kind of overwhelming or the scary kind?" "Both," I said honestly. He was quiet for a moment, and then I felt him move closer, his sleeping bag rustling. His hand found mine in the darkness between us, his fingers threading through mine with a gentleness that made my breath catch. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm really glad we got paired together. These past few days, talking to you, being around you, it's been really special to me." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Me too," I managed to say. We fell asleep like that, hands clasped between us, and I dreamed of things I'd never let myself dream about before. Our last day on the trail was bittersweet. We packed up camp slowly, neither of us eager to finish this thing that had somehow become so important. The hike back to the trailhead felt too short, the miles passing too quickly. Tyler caught up with me at one point, giving me a knowing look that suggested he'd noticed something had shifted, but he didn't ask, and I didn't tell. I wasn't ready to put words to it yet, wasn't ready to examine it in the harsh light of the regular world. That last night, we camped at the same spot where we'd started, and after dinner, Kai and I took a walk away from the group. We found a fallen log near the stream and sat down, our shoulders touching, watching the water move over the rocks. "I don't want this to end," Kai said quietly. "This week, I mean. Getting to know you." "It doesn't have to," I said, surprised by my own boldness. "End, I mean. We live in the same city." "We could, I don't know. Hang out, get coffee. Do normal people things." He turned to look at me then, and in the fading light, I could see something vulnerable in his eyes, something hopeful. "I'd like that," he said. "A lot." We sat there until it was almost dark, talking about what we'd do when we got back, the places we'd go, the things we'd show each other. And when we finally walked back to camp, his hand found mine again, and this time I didn't question it, didn't overthink it. I just held on. That last night in the tent was different. We lay facing each other instead of on our backs, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face, could see the outline of his features in the darkness. We talked in whispers, even though there was no one close enough to hear us, and at some point his hand came up to touch my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "I'm going to miss this," he said softly. "The sound of your breathing next to me. The way you talk yourself through being nervous about things. The way you've opened up to me this week." "I'm going to miss it too," I said. And then, because I was tired of being afraid, because something about the darkness and the intimacy of this space made me brave, I added, "I'm going to miss you." "You don't have to," he said, moving even closer. "I'm not going anywhere." And then he kissed me, soft and careful, a question and an answer all at once. I kissed him back, my hand coming up to tangle in his hair, and it felt like everything I'd been holding back for years suddenly had permission to exist. We kissed until we were both breathless, until we were tangled together in a way that made it hard to tell where I ended. And he began, and when we finally pulled apart, I was smiling so hard my face hurt. We fell asleep wrapped around each other, and I woke up several times during the night just to make sure it was real, that he was really there, that this was really happening. The next morning, we packed up for the last time and hiked back to the trailhead. The vans were waiting, and reality was creeping back in with all its complications and questions. But when Kai grabbed my hand as we walked toward the parking lot, when he looked at me with that smile that I now knew was just for me, I felt something settle inside me, something that felt like coming home. Tyler cornered me while we were loading the vans, his eyebrows raised in question. "So," he said, "you and Kai seem close." "Yeah," I said, unable to keep the smile off my face. "We are." "Good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "It's about time you look that happy." On the drive back to the city, Kai and I sat together in the back of the van, his hand in mine, making plans. Coffee the next day, dinner later that week, a movie we both wanted to see, normal things that felt extraordinary, because they were with him, because they were real, because I was finally letting myself want something I'd been too afraid to acknowledge before. When we finally pulled up to the meeting point, where we'd all left our cars, there was a flurry of goodbyes and promises to stay in touch that probably wouldn't be kept. But when Kai and I said goodbye, it felt different. It felt like a beginning instead of an ending. "I'll text you when I get home," he said, standing close enough that I could smell the combination of sweat and soap and him that I'd grown so familiar with. "You better," I said, and then, because we were in public and I wasn't quite brave enough yet, I just squeezed his hand before letting go. I watched him walk to his car, watched him turn back to wave at me once before he got in, and I felt something I'd never quite felt before. Not just happiness, but rightness, like pieces of myself I didn't know were scattered had suddenly come together. Tyler drove us home, mercifully quiet for most of the drive, letting me sit with my thoughts and the smile I couldn't seem to wipe off my face. It wasn't until we were almost back to our apartment that he spoke. "You know I'm happy for you, right?" he said. "Whatever this is, whoever you're figuring out you are, I'm glad you're figuring it out." "Thanks," I said, meaning it more than he probably knew. That night, alone in my own bed for the first time in a week, I couldn't sleep. The silence felt wrong, the space too big. I was reaching for my phone to text Kai something meaningless, just to feel connected to him when my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Can't sleep," it read. "Too quiet. I miss the sound of your breathing." I smiled at my phone like an idiot, my heart doing that flutter thing again. "I miss it too," I typed back. "All of it." My phone rang a second later, and I answered to hear his voice, soft and a little uncertain. "Is it weird that I want to hear your voice?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want to hear yours too." We talked for 2 hours, about nothing and everything, and I fell asleep with my phone still pressed to my ear, the sound of his breathing in my ear just like it had been for the past week. The next day we met for coffee like we'd planned, and it was awkward for about 30 seconds before it wasn't, before we fell back into the easy rhythm we'd found in that tent. We talked for 3 hours, until the coffee shop was closing and we had to leave, and then we walked around the city for another 2 hours, neither of us ready to say goodbye. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a pattern. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, turned into spending entire days together, exploring the city, cooking meals in each other's apartments, watching movies on the couch with the excuse of friendship that we both knew was something more. And slowly, carefully, I let myself acknowledge what was happening, let myself want it without the fear that had always held me back before. It was a month after the camping trip when things shifted again. We were at my apartment, supposedly watching a movie, but really just talking like we always did, when Kai went quiet in that way that meant he was working up to saying something important. "I need to tell you something," he said, and my heart jumped into my throat. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I'm falling for you," he said, looking at me with those eyes that had become so familiar, so important. "Actually, I think I've already fallen, and I know we've been taking things slow, figuring things out, but I need you to know that this is real for me. You're real for me." I kissed him then, cutting off whatever else he was going to say, pouring everything I felt into it, all the fear and hope and joy and terror of this new thing I was becoming. When we pulled apart, I was breathing hard, my forehead resting against his. "I'm falling for you too," I said. "I think I have been since that first night in the tent, when you made me listen to the quiet. You make me feel like myself in a way I never have before." He kissed me again, and this time it was different, deeper, more certain. We spent the rest of the night tangled together on my couch, talking and kissing and making promises about tomorrow and next week and all the days after that. It's been 6 months now since that camping trip, and Kai is asleep in my bed, his breathing the soundtrack to my late-night thoughts. We've had our challenges, moments where the newness of this, of us, of who I'm learning to be, felt overwhelming. Coming out to my family was hard. Coming out to myself was harder. But every difficult moment has been worth it for this. For the way he makes me laugh. For the way he knows when I need space and when I need to be held. For the way he looks at me like I'm exactly who he wants. Tyler moved out last month to live with his girlfriend, and Kai moved in 2 weeks later. It felt fast to everyone else. But to us, it felt right. We'd already spent a week sleeping inches apart in a tent. We'd already learned each other's breathing patterns, already knew how to exist in close quarters, already understood that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the dark. Last night, as we were falling asleep, Kai pulled me close and whispered in my ear. "Remember that last night on the trail when I said I'd miss the sound of your breathing?" "Yeah," I said, smiling against his shoulder. "I don't have to miss it anymore," he said. "I get to fall asleep to it every night. That's pretty amazing." And he's right. It is amazing. This whole thing is amazing. The fact that I took a chance on a camping trip I didn't want to go on. The fact that I got paired with someone who saw me, really saw me, and made me brave enough to see myself. The fact that I get to wake up every morning next to someone who makes me want to be more honest, more open, more fully myself. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd fall in love while sharing a tent with someone, but I did. And in doing so, I found not just him, but myself. The version of me that was always there, just waiting for the right person, the right moment, the right amount of courage to finally emerge.